His Chosen Mate. Written by Sabrina Kader. Narrated by Maggie Weston. Chapter 1. You look very different from the last time I saw you. I looked to my side at my sister as she drove the car. I did notice her throwing me weird glances since I saw her at the airport today. To be honest, I was disappointed to see her there. I was actually hoping to see my mother. Should I take that as a compliment? I asked her in a flat tone. She chuckled as if I cracked a joke. Yeah, I did mean that in a good way, she reassured me. Mom is really excited to see you. She has been babbling about you non-stop since you told her you were going to come home, she added, glancing my way again. A small smile tugged at the corners of my lips. That is understandable, I sighed. She is the only person who truly cares about me, I said, turning my face to the front again. My sister cleared her throat uncomfortably. Oh, don't be like that, Cora. She shook her head. I care about you too. I wanted to scoff at that. Not when all your friends made fun of me. I shrugged. If she thinks what I forgot, what I have gone through while I was here, and pretended that everything was fine and dandy, then she was wrong. There is a crack in our relationship, and no amount of glue is going to fix that. That was like 10 years ago, Cora, she cried out. I'm a better person now. It is not my fault that I got my wolf and you didn't. They didn't want to. This is not about me getting the wolf. I shook my head, looking at her again. You never called me even once since I left, not even a quick text. That itself shows me how much you care about me, Mira. I smiled at her and watched her look away, unable to handle my accusing gaze. A few seconds passed, and she didn't say anything, but just when I was about to look away from her, I thought I saw her part her lips to say something. Let's not continue talking and make this awkward more than it already is, I quickly said, not wanting to resume our conversation. She muttered something under her breath, but I didn't care. I gave up on her a very long time ago. I turned my gaze to the side, hoping that would make me feel better. It looked like a lot have changed since the last time I was here. I wonder if I can still get around here like I used to. The town isn't the same anymore. Whoever planned the infrastructure of this town while I was away should be applauded for what they have achieved. That was impressive. Only it would be more excellent if people in this town had changed for the better as well. Just when I thought I wouldn't get surprised after this, my sister pulled the car to a stop at a different driveway. I frowned and looked at her questioningly. What? We moved into a bigger house 2 years ago. She shrugged before killing the engine and getting out of the car. I sighed and glanced at the house. It does look bigger than the house we used to live in. I quietly got out of the car and took my bag from the boot before stepping into the house. And immediately, my nostrils were hit with the familiar scent of home. Cora! I grinned, turning to look at my mother, who was running toward me excitedly. She tackled me into a big warm hug, knocking out all of my breath momentarily as she squeezed me in her arms. I dropped the bag on the floor to hug her back, inhaling into the crook of her neck. I missed her so much. It is good to see you too, Mom. I mumbled into her shoulder and felt another presence behind her. Dad, I greeted, letting go of my mother to give him a side hug. My father and I are not that close, but I do know that he loves me. We've missed you so much, dear, he said, hugging me back. You look absolutely stunning. The little girl is not little anymore, he sang, pulling away to get a good look at me. I couldn't help but blush at that. Thanks, I guess. I scratched the back of my neck uncomfortably. Still not comfortable with getting complimented, he noted, and I chuckled softly, nodding my head in agreement. All right. I guess I will see you all at dinner. Pack matters, my father added, glancing at his watch. I'll catch up with you soon, kiddo, he said before rushing out of the house. I smiled at his retreating figure. Well, that hasn't changed, I said, glancing at my mother. My mother grinned at me. Oh, you must be tired, she said. Let's get you to your room. Give it to me. I can carry them for you, she offered when I bent down to get my bag. I shook my head at her. That's okay, Mom, I said. They don't weigh that much. I shrugged at her. She smiled at me. That hasn't changed as well, she said. She gave me a quick tour around the house and showed me the room I am going to stay in until I go back to London for my graduation. I wasn't a picky person, so the room was more than enough for me. I actually kind of liked it. Nice house, I commented. I was actually surprised when Mira said you guys moved. Well, you must have been busy with your examinations and assignments that you forgot I told you about that. My mother shook her head at me. Rest, she said, gesturing at the bed. Join us for dinner later. It will be our first dinner together in many years. I nodded my head at her. I took my sweet time and looked around the room again before letting out a deep breath. I didn't know what I imagined when I decided to come back home, but a new house is certainly not what I expected. I decided to unpack my belongings first. It took me less than 20 minutes to neatly fold my clothes and hang them in the wardrobe, as I didn't bring that many items of clothing from my campus. Besides, I'm here only for a month. I am planning to move to London permanently after my stay here. I'm happier there anyway. Time flew by as I made myself comfortable in my new room, and before I knew it, Mira was knocking on my room door with a sour face, asking me to come down to join them for dinner. Half-heartedly, that is. I knew she wouldn't like it if I came back here. That's why I stayed away from home all these years. It is rather a foreign feeling to be seated with my family after a very long time. It made me awkward. Clumsy, even. I couldn't help but feel a little insecure, which is ridiculous, considering they are my family, the people that I should be the most comfortable with. So, how was life abroad? My father started when the silence got too overbearing. Must have been nice judging the way she looks right now. Mira scoffed under her breath, earning a glare from my father. I swallowed the spoonful of lasagna I was munching before answering. It was peaceful. No one judged me. I shrugged at him. I can be who I am without feeling left out, I added, gazing at my sister meaningfully. Mira rolled her eyes and looked away. Seriously, how old does she think she is? My mother cleared her throat uncomfortably. How's the food? She asked, changing the subject easily. I made it, especially for you, she added when I averted my eyes from her. I smiled at her and gave her an approving nod. It is delicious, Mom, I said, glancing down at my plate. I would be lying if I said I didn't miss your cooking, I went on and watched the smile on her face widen. Cora, my father said suddenly, and the tone of his voice instantly suggested to me that whatever he was going to say next would be serious. I looked at him and held my breath, waiting for him to continue. You have to meet the Alpha. It is customary to meet the Alpha upon returning back home after many years abroad. Yeah, I forgot about that. Won't Alpha Chris let me pass? I asked him. I mean, he knows who I am, right? He knows I don't hold a threat to the pack because... I trailed, knowing my father would understand what I was implying. Because I am human and not a wolf. What can a weak human do to the entire pack? My mother and father exchanged a meaningful glance before my father spoke up. Chris is not our Alpha anymore. My father shook his head. Our pack fought in a battle a few years ago and lost Chris, he said, with a forlorn expression on his face. My eyes nearly bulged out from their sockets. What? I asked, shocked. My father opened his mouth to say something, but Mira beat him to it. Yeah, you were not here, she sighed. You were busy having the best time of your life. I frowned at my only sister. What could I possibly do even if I was here? I asked her. I can't save anyone. I can't save myself, for God's sake. I am not a wolf. I shook my head. Sometimes you talk like you have no brain, Mira. I shook my head at her, disappointed. She couldn't say anything in return for that. Back to what we were talking about, my father said quickly, sensing how the air around us thickened with tension in a matter of seconds. We have merged with another neighboring pack, and now their Alpha is our Alpha, he stated. I thought about it for a second. Alpha Chris had a son, right? Why isn't he the Alpha? I asked him, remembering one of the bullies I endured in high school. My father actually looked surprised. Jax wasn't capable of looking after the pack. He also lost in the duel when he challenged Alpha Noah. He explained. Alpha Noah. I tested the name on my tongue. The name itself rang with an amount of power that I cannot explain. When should I meet him? I asked my father coolly, despite the fact that I hated that. Tomorrow will be fine. My father nodded. I let out a sigh and nodded at him. It is okay. I just have to meet him once. Then, I will be free to live in my room for the rest of the month. Can I come as well? Mira asked eagerly. I gave her a look. Why was she suddenly interested in coming to accompany me? No, my father said coldly. How many times should I remind you that Alpha Noah doesn't like the she-wolves giving him extra attention, Mira? He rubbed his face tiredly. Please have some dignity. I watched both of them in confusion as Mira spoke up again. Well, there is no harm in trying, right? She asked. He is young, strong, and handsome. Any she-wolf will be interested when an alpha like him is still single. She made it sound like that was the most obvious thing on earth. Ah, I see. Now I get why she wants to meet the alpha. My father shook his head at her and looked at me. I'll accompany you. Be sure to be ready by 9 in the morning. He smiled at me, and I nodded again, having no other choice. Why should I follow their customs when I am not one of them? I was dying to ask that question to my father, but I bit down my tongue, not wanting to hurt his feelings. Dinner went quickly after that. I helped my mother to tidy up the kitchen before spending some time with her in the living area. Why are you looking at me like that, Mom? I asked her when she kept staring at me with a strange emotion in her eyes. She sighed. I just can't believe that you're here. It feels nice. She smiled at me. Thank you for coming. I know you're here only because of me, she said, leaning forward to put her palm against my cheek. Sometimes I feel it is my fault that you don't feel comfortable here. She trailed, her eyes getting misty. Don't be like that. I shook my head, placing my hand against hers. Nothing is your fault. If I hadn't married your father, you would have a normal life, she sighed. You're suffering because of me. If I am a wolf, then you would have been one too. I gave her a look. Are you ashamed of being a human? I asked her. Her eyes grew wide before she started shaking her head frantically. Of course not. I am just sad that you don't fit in well around here, she explained. I turned my body to face my mother fully. Mom, I started, I am grateful that you gave birth to me, and I am happy with how I am. Not even at any moment of my life, I felt disappointed for not inheriting my werewolf genes. I reassured her. Wise words coming from someone so young, Cora, my mother said, smiling at me again. For some reason, I felt my cheeks heat up at that. I am not that young, Mom. I am graduating in a month. I reminded her. Then I will start a full job. I continued, without thinking much. You're going to work somewhere here, right? She asked me, and her eyes were hopeful. Dang. I was hoping she wouldn't ask me that until the end of my stay here. I shook my head at her, watching her face fall. I was going to let you know this later, but I took a deep breath. No, Mom. I am planning to work in London. I have already sent out my resume to various companies there, and even got accepted into some. A few seconds passed by in silence until she let out a sigh. You're not going to come back here then, she said, not hiding her disappointment. I will, I said, and she raised her eyebrows at me. Just not frequently, I added with a sheepish smile. She was quiet again for a few seconds. I guess whatever makes you happy should make me happy as well, she finally said. I am not going to hold you back from what you desire. I smiled and hugged her. Thank you for understanding, Mom, I said. No matter where I am, I will always love you. She hugged me back tightly. I love you more than you could imagine, Cora. Chapter 2. The next morning, I went for a quick run around the neighborhood, as it is how I always start my day in London. It still baffles me how well this town was upgraded. So well that I made a mental note to mention it to the Alpha later when I meet him. If he is nice, that's it. My mother did say he is a kind person, but every Alpha I knew in the past had one thing in common. They were all very authoritative, which can easily be interpreted as being rude. After my run, I took a shower before coming down to have breakfast with my mother. The sight of freshly made pancakes instantly made me drool. "Mom, those pancakes look amazing," I gush, taking in a whiff. They even smell delicious. "Come on, have some." She smiled at me, stacking up a generous amount of pancakes on a plate before handing it to me. She gave me a bottle of maple syrup. "I remember you would have the syrup more than the pancakes back then." I laughed at her. "Yeah, but these days I can't do that," I said, grabbing the bottle and squeezing it all over those fluffy pancakes. My mother sat down next to me. "That is still considered a lot, Cora." She shook her head as she watched me dump the contents of the bottle on my plate, and I gave her a sheepish smile in return. "How was your run?" I took a big bite and took my sweet time chewing them down before answering her. "Interesting," I said, nodding my head. "I saw a few familiar faces, but none of them acknowledged me. Not that I'm complaining." I shrugged, remembering how a group of young men and women talked in a hushed manner when they saw me running around. I knew them from school, but I had forgotten all their names. My mother scowled at that. "They are missing out, then." She shrugged. I grinned at her. "So much," I agreed with a wink. "A lot has changed around here," I told her. "The facilities around here are insane. I mean, I didn't expect Orchard Square to be this advanced. There was a tram service in the town, and it was completely free. When I was here last time, the public buses were so old and unclean. I haven't seen the rest of the town yet, but I am already impressed." My mother smiled. "Thanks to Alpha Noah," she said. "He really is a good leader. He made sure everything was accessible within town." "Then it was a good thing the Orchard Pack has a new Alpha then." "That is really impressive of him," I said, munching my food. "It is good to know that the leader actually cares about their people once." I sighed. It is hard to see that these days. "Yeah, he treats me equally, as if I am one of the she-wolves as well." My mother added another pancake onto my plate. "No one respected me as much until he took over as Alpha. I mean, I am human. They didn't receive me well at first, but then they accepted me. But still, it felt like something was missing." I listened to my mother quietly. It wasn't always that she talked about herself or how the pack was treating her. She was always the person who suffers in silence. "But now, I actually mingle around quite well." She looked up at me with a proud smile. "I even attend some clubs with some she-wolves." "Good for you, Mom." I was happy for her, but to think what she went through all these years was disturbing. "You said you were sad for me when I'm not interacting well with everyone here, but you have faced the same situations as well," I pointed out. "Why have you never told me about this before? How could I miss something that affected my mother like that? Have I been so selfish that I didn't pay attention to my mother when I was younger? All these years, I thought I was the only person who was having a hard time in this pack. But then there was my mother as well. She never felt she belonged with the pack either." My mother sighed. "You were already having a bad childhood," she said with a sad smile. "I didn't want to make it worse." She shook her head. "Don't worry, everything is better now, thanks to young Alpha." She leaned forward and patted my back. "I don't even know what the Alpha looks like, but I already have immense respect for that man." "You are actually making me interested to meet this man now," I grinned, finishing my food. Her eyes lit up. "Believe me, he is someone worth knowing." She nodded her head. "All right. Do you want 2 more?" she asked, ready to add another piece of pancake onto my plate, but I shook my head. "I'm full." I smiled at her. We prattled about random things for some time until my father came down to have his breakfast.
"Where is Mira?"
he asked, when he realized his other daughter was missing from the table. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to answer. She went out with her friends, said she was going for a hike this morning. My mother shrugged. Hiking? Hiking? My father asked in disbelief, and then my parents exchanged a meaningful gaze. I knew that they were communicating via their mind link. I pretended like I didn't notice it, but I can say that Mira didn't join us for breakfast because of me. I expected her to be a little bothered by my return, so this doesn't surprise me. It is awkward, but that's okay. It's only for a month or so. Then my family can go back to how it used to be all this while. My father ate up his breakfast quietly after that and looked up at me. Are you ready, Cora? He asked me. You were supposed to meet the Alpha today. He reminded me, even though I hadn't forgotten about it. I nodded. Yes, Dad, I said, standing on my feet. I am ready. My father drove me to the Alpha's residence, all the while reminding me to treat the Alpha with respect. He told me not to look into the Alpha's eyes unless I was told to do so, and to always address the Alpha by his title. Just because I was living in the human world for so long doesn't mean I forgot how all the Alphas around the world like to be treated. They want their people to look at them with respect, loyalty, and admiration. The Alpha house is another thing that blew my mind. Who knew the Alpha had really good taste when it comes to interior design? The inside of the huge mansion was lavishly furnished. Everything looked so expensive that I was afraid to touch anything. After 15 minutes of waiting, the young beta of the pack finally came out from the Alpha's room. The Alpha will meet you now, he said, his tone void of any emotion. He requested to meet her alone, he added when my father stood up to accompany me. I looked at my father in alarm, but my father's calm eyes implied only one thing, that I have nothing to be worried about. My father gave me an encouraging nod when I hesitated. Knowing I had no other choice, I gave my father a tight smile and then knocked on the door. I waited until I heard a deep masculine voice grant me to walk into the room before pushing the door and stepping in. I kept my eyes trained on the floor and sucked in a deep breath before greeting the Alpha in a polite tone. Hello, Alpha, I said clearly. It is a pleasure to meet you. I was so nervous that I could literally hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I waited for the Alpha to say something. I could feel a pair of intense eyes on me as they assessed me. Look me in the eye while you're talking. I heard a powerful voice command me, and just like that, every cell in my body became submissive, ready to follow his orders. I lifted my eyes from the floor to look at the most intense pair of silver eyes gazing at me. Understood, Alpha. I nodded my head, a small smile on my face. The Alpha continued to watch me with a calculating expression on his face. He was sitting behind a desk, and his body was leaning forward in interest. I must admit one thing. This man was the most attractive person that I had ever met in my whole life. I knew werewolves were supposed to be gorgeous and all, but this man is another level. It looked like the god took his sweet time to sculpt the Alpha's face when he was created. Those silver eyes were framed by a set of perfect eyebrows. His nose was straight, and his lips were full. His dark hair was styled messily, but still, it looked good on him. Overall, he didn't look like he was a day over 30. I assumed he might be older, but this man should be in his late 20s now. We continued to stare at each other. He judges me judging him. I don't know if it's just me imagining, or if he really looked at me as if he found me intriguing. Nevertheless, I found my cheeks starting to heat up under his intense gaze. What is your name? He asked me, breaking the silence after a good minute or so. Cora, I responded to him. Cora Williams, I say, daughter of Mason Williams and Ashley Williams. He nodded his head, gesturing me to take a seat in front of him. I gave him a polite smile before walking further into the room and eventually sitting right in front of him. Suddenly, it felt like I was attending a job interview or something. Why are you here? He asked me, his eyes never leaving mine. It has been years since I went to London to further my studies, and I have not returned since then. I wanted to spend a month with my family before going back to London again. I made sure that every piece of information that he needed was in my statement so we could be done quickly. The corners of his lips tugged into a cryptic smile at my answer. "The way you answer suggests to me that you are a straightforward person," he said, closing the file in front of him and giving me his undivided attention. "Usually I am," I said. "Alpha," I added quickly when it felt like I sounded rude. But the Alpha didn't seem to mind. He nodded his head. "That is good to know," he said conversationally. "I hope you won't cause any trouble while you're here." He went on, and I couldn't help but stifle a smile at that. "What? What's so funny?" he asked me, his eyebrows pulling together in question. How could I be so reckless? I was talking to the Alpha, for God's sake. "No, it's nothing." I shook my head, hiding my smile with my hand. "Tell me," he said, smiling, but the command was there. There. I have no other choice but to admit that he actually sounded funny. "It is just that." I took a deep breath, hoping my choice of words wouldn't offend him. "It amuses me to think that you think I'm a threat. I mean, what can I possibly do to a pack full of werewolves? I am just a weak human." He listened to me while I ranted, and the smile never left his lips. "Well, if you put it like that," he said, "it is actually funny, yes," he agreed, chuckling lightly. If this is how he is all the time, then he must be one of the kindest Alpha out there. It is rare to see an Alpha admit his fault or laugh with a person who actually thinks that he is funny. Another minute passed while we stared at each other. He was really studying my face, as if he was trying to figure out what type of person I am. "You haven't gone through the ritual to fully become a pack member when I took off yet," he stated. "When are you planning to do that?" he asked me. My smile faltered just a little. Do I have to do it, Alpha?" I asked him uncertainly. "I mean, I am human. I don't feel any bond with the pack or anything like that. Is it necessary for me to do that?" I questioned him. Besides, my stay here is short. I didn't really want to go through any kind of ritual. It sounded scary to me. He was quiet for a while before speaking up again. "I will have to think about it, as I have never encountered a human pack member in my life," he said. "But if it is needed, then you would have to go through the rituals, Cora. It doesn't matter how long you're here." I nodded my head again. "Very well, Alpha," I said. At least he is considering my request. "That is all for now, Cora. I guess I will see you around then," he said, and I quickly stood up and bowed at him in respect. "Thank you, Alpha," I said before turning around to walk out of the room. I felt his eyes burning holes at the back of my head until I exited the room, but I didn't dare to glance behind to confirm it. "What did he say?" my father asked as soon as I stepped out of the room. "Not to cause any trouble while I'm here?" I shrugged. My father looked like he was about to say something, but the Alpha's door opened and then Alpha Noah walked out of his room. "Ah, I see you're still here," the Alpha said when his eyes fell on me. "Mason, you never told me you had such an interesting daughter," he added, acknowledging my father as well. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled at him while my father answered. "She was in London when you took over, Alpha," my father said. Silver eyes were on me again. "I see," the Alpha said. Then only I remembered that I wanted to praise him for his hard work, especially in developing this town. "I have been meaning to tell you this," I said after clearing my throat. "When I came back here, it was stepping into another world. You have done an impressive job at developing this town. It's truly remarkable, Alpha," I said sincerely. The Alpha smiled again. "Thank you, Cora. I just did what I had to do to make everyone here comfortable," he said, and then looked at my father. "Mason, I need to have a word with you," he said before vanishing into the room again. "I'll be back," my father said, stepping behind the Alpha and leaving me alone. Well, that was an interesting meetup with the Alpha. Chapter 3. Why did he say that? I finally asked my father after he stomped on the gas pedal, driving the car out of the Alpha's property. My father and the Alpha were talking in that room for quite some time, and I couldn't help but feel it was about me. I know the world doesn't revolve around me, but I can't shake off my intuitions. My father glanced at me from the corner of his eyes. "That you might have to attend a ritual," he said, averting his eyes to the road again. They were talking about that for that long? That's all? I asked him in disbelief. It can't be, right? Yeah. My father nodded without looking at me. We also discussed some pack matters if you are wondering why I was in Alpha's room for that long, he added. Ah, that is understandable. Maybe my intuitions were wrong after all. Okay, I sighed. Can't I skip the ritual part, Dad? I'm not a big fan of slicing my palm to squeeze out some blood in a goblet. I winced. Just thinking about that gives me a headache. I don't heal as quickly as you guys as well. My father exhaled sharply. You know the drill, Cora, he began. Everyone here abides by the rules and customs of the pack. You might not be a werewolf, but that doesn't mean you do not belong here. That means you have to follow the Alpha's orders as well. He went on firmly. I ground my teeth together. If I only knew back then that I would have to go through rituals and all, I probably wouldn't have come back. But now that I'm here, I got to accept it as it is. All right, I'll endure it then. I sighed. Can you drop me off at the cafe? I wanted to wander around for a bit. The truth is, I need coffee to calm down. From the corners of my eyes, I saw my father's head whip to the side to look at me as if I talked in an alien language. You sure? He asked, disbelief evident in his tone. Yeah, why not? I asked, raising my eyebrows at him in question. Why does he look so bewildered? He cleared his throat. You hated going out when you were younger. He muttered under his breath, looking at the front again. I thought you were going to spend the rest of your stay locked up in your room. I made a face at that. Well, that's because kids were so bad back then. They always made fun of me whenever they get the chance. I shook my head, remembering the time I'd rather stay at home than go out. Now, I simply don't care anymore. I shrugged. Living alone in London for the past few years has taught me a lot of things. That includes enjoying my me time alone outdoors. Your mother was right, my father mused. You are a grown person right now. I scratched the back of my neck awkwardly and looked out the window. Thank you, I guess, I said, not knowing what else to say. My father dropped me in the heart of Orchard Square, which looked like a mini city. People were swarming around the shops, getting whatever they needed. It was nice to watch them, but it would have been nicer if they were humans. Whenever I walk past someone, I can feel their gaze on me. They probably forgot all about me now. They are interested to know why a human girl wandering around a town full of werewolves. I didn't pay any heed to them. I walked around the town for a while until I found a cozy cafe. I entered it without thinking much and went to the counter to buy a drink. The barista looked at me incredulously, but I kept a straight face as I ordered what I wanted. Are you new here? She asked me, her eyes curious. No, I shook my head, but it does feel like that. I answered her honestly as I paid for the drink. I could hear her confused gaze on me as I made my way to sit in the most secluded area in the cafe. I sipped into my coffee and sighed. My mood was instantly lifted. I took out my smartphone and scrolled through some social media apps as I had my coffee until a sweet feminine voice greeted me. Hi, you're Cora, right? I looked up to see a familiar redhead staring at me. Yes, I trailed. The truth is, I forgot everyone here as well. I studied the pretty woman's face for a second. I'm sorry, I can't recognize. Wait, you're B, right? I asked, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. How could I forget one of the few nicest people during my schooling days? B's eyes lit up. I thought you wouldn't recognize me," she said, grinning at me in delight. She glanced behind her and beckoned someone. "Hey, Justin, come here. I told you she would remember us." My eyes widened. Is that the Justin Parker? The one I secretly had a crush on a few years ago? I shifted my gaze from her to look at the approaching young man and held in a gasp. Yes, it was him, and he looked more attractive than before. He was smiling lazily as he made his way towards us. "Hi, Cora," he greeted. His eyes were light and friendly. "It's been ages, huh?" I tried not to blush. "Yeah," I said in a small voice, smiling at him awkwardly. My eyes went from him to Bea, who was smiling down at me still. "I'm sorry I couldn't recognize you at first. You looked a little different than before," I admitted, feeling like a jerk. Bea's smile broadened. "You look great, by the way," she chirped. "Justin and I were a little doubtful. We weren't entirely sure if it was you, but you're like the only human who was in this town before this, so I thought I'd come and confirm it myself." I smiled at her, nodding my head. My gaze flickered toward Justin again when I felt his eyes drilling holes at the side of my face. "Mind if we join?" he asked me, gesturing to the empty seats in front of me. I looked at the seats. "Oh, yeah, sure," I agreed, motioning them to sit. "Guess this hasn't changed, huh?" Justin grinned as he sat down in the opposite chair. "It is very you to choose this spot, away from everyone," he noted. I nodded. "To avoid any unpleasant encounters," I said. It didn't take long for us to settle into a comfortable conversation, talking about our good times and all the time that I was away from them. It felt nice to catch up with old friends over coffee. It turns out they both went to a local college and are now on their semester break. "Ah, so you're going to stay here for a month," Bea said. "That is nice, because we are on a break too. We can spend plenty of time together just like we used to," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It'll be like old times." Justin nodded in agreement. "We should go to the lake we used to hang out at," he suggested. "Oh, we should," Bea nodded her head. "What do you think, Cora?" she asked, looking at me now. I smiled at them. "That sounds like a nice idea," I agreed. "I remember that place used to be our safe spot." "Yes!" Bea gushed. "Justin and I still go there now and then when we have time." I looked at Justin and then at her again. "Are you two dating or something?" I asked them unsurely, hoping I didn't offend either of them by asking that. Bea burst out laughing at my question. "What? Of course not." She shook her head. "I am waiting for my mate, and Justin here is a big flirt." She looked at him meaningfully. Justin's eyes widened, and then his cheeks turned pink slightly. "What? No," he whispered, yelling at her. "She is lying. I'm just super friendly when it comes to girls in general," he quickly said, looking at me as if he was making sure that I didn't think the worst of him. Before I could say something to that, I felt the entire cafe become so silent that I looked away from my friends to see what was wrong. "The Alpha is here," I heard Bea say in a small voice. Just then, Alpha Noah stepped into the cafe, radiating his power as he did. Everyone in the cafe stood up in respect and bowed to him. "Alpha." They greeted him and sat down when he motioned them to go back to do whatever they were doing before. I didn't realize that I was the only person who was sitting down until Alpha Noah's eyes landed directly on me. I quickly stood up and bowed my head, copying everyone's actions. "Alpha," I said, looking up at him again. Alpha Noah nodded his head in acknowledgement and went to the counter, probably to order his drink. I held in a sigh and sat down in my seat again, looking at my friends. "What were we talking about?" I asked the two of them. "About Justin being a flirt." Bea grinned at me. "Bea?" Justin said in warning, but Bea only laughed at him in response. I smiled at the duo, so that means both of them haven't met their mates yet. "Are you guys supposed to meet your mates by now?" I asked them curiously. "I thought you were supposed to meet them before you attain a certain age or something." I don't really know how this mate thing works, and I never paid attention to it before, because I am human, and that meant I probably don't have a mate. But I do remember how every werewolf in this town was so excited to meet their mate. That is not how that works. Justin shook his head. You meet your mate when the time is right. I hope the time will never be right for me, though. He sighed. I frowned at him. Don't you want to meet your mate? I asked him. He glanced behind before leaning towards me. I refuse to be tied to someone that I am predestined to love, he whispered. I want to be with someone because I want to be with them, and not because of some bond. B snorted. That is what he keeps saying. Wait for him to meet his mate, and he would be the first person to fall at her feet, she muttered, shaking her head. I won't. He gritted his teeth. B rolled her eyes at him before focusing on me. What about you, Cora? Do you have a life partner yet? I shook my head. Nope. She parted her lips to say something, but stopped herself as her eyes zeroed at something behind me. I didn't think I would see you here, Cora. I heard Alpha Noah's voice from behind me, and I sat up straighter reflexively. Both B and Justin looked at me in surprise when the Alpha casually acknowledged me. I smiled at them. I met Alpha Noah earlier today. I quickly explained to them before looking at the Alpha. Yeah, I was just catching up with some old friends, Alpha, I said politely. The Alpha looked at Justin and B. I didn't know you had friends here, he mused before fixating his gaze on me again. But I am glad you will have someone to hang out with. He smiled. Yes, Alpha, I'm glad too, I said awkwardly. He watched me for a few more fleeting seconds before nodding his head. He turned on his heels without saying anything else and walked away from there and eventually out of the cafe. I released the breath that I didn't realize I was holding and noticed that everyone in the cafe was looking at me, astonished. I cleared my throat uncomfortably and looked at my friends, who were wearing the same expressions. What? I asked, raising my shoulders a little. The Alpha just came to you and started a conversation, she said. Yeah, what about that? I asked. I knew it doesn't happen all the time, but Alpha Noah looked like a friendly person, so I thought nothing of his behavior. He probably talked to everyone else in this town. B and Justin exchanged a look. We have never seen him talking so casually to someone else before this, Justin said. My eyes widened. I thought my mom said that he was one of the kindest alphas out there. B nodded. He is. No doubt about that. But that doesn't mean anyone can approach him just like that, B said. I leaned back on my seat. Maybe he was just making sure that I am on my best behavior while I'm here. I shrugged. He did tell me not to cause any trouble during my stay here. I shrugged. B and Justin didn't look convinced, but half-heartedly nodded their heads. But you have to be careful from now on, B said. The most eligible bachelor just talked to you, and that means you will receive a lot of hate from those desperate she-wolves who are trying to get the Alpha's attention. I chuckled lightly. It is not something I am not used to getting. I shrugged. The hate, I meant, I said quickly before she thinks I'm bragging about the attention. Well, if you put it like that, B nodded. I spent a little more time with Justin and B in that cafe and exchanged phone numbers with them, so it will be easier to go out with them in the future before going back home. All the while, wondering why the unapproachable Alpha came up to me and started a conversation. My conscience says that he was just being nice, but something in the back of my mind said something else. I know it is irrational to be flattered, but I couldn't help it.